Hello, my name is Gordon McNeely. I'm the chair of the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development. Today is Friday, October 9th, 2020. With us as members, we have Trish Altaz, Heath McDonald, Brad Trivers, Hannah Bell. And first thing, I would just like to get an motion to adopt the agenda. Hannah Bell. And today we have a presentation on affordable housing development, and we have the Deputy Minister and Director of Housing with us, so I'll pass it over to our guests to introduce themselves and start with their presentation.
David Keedwell, the Deputy Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Sonya Cobb, Director of Housing and Services for the province of PEI. Can't see the lights on. There we go. Okay, so thank you to the committee for inviting us to come and provide a briefing on the Affordable Housing Development Program. Perhaps we'll just start with a little bit of an overview and a reminder as to what the program is about and what the intention of the program is. It was created a year ago in October of 2019, and the intention of the program is to incentivize developers to add new affordable units to the market. Developers can receive a forgivable loan of up to $45,000 per unit from government, and to be able to receive that funding, they can complete new builds, have units that are currently under construction or renovation to an existing building, as long as it's adding new affordable units to the market. We have a mix of opportunities for both private developers who can receive support for up to 50% of the units that they're building. Nonprofits, however, municipalities and co-ops could receive support for up to 100% of the units in their project. On the other side, government receives the right to select tenants for the units that we provide funding for, and we can ensure affordability at a 25% rent geared to income level by providing additional assistance to tenants who are experiencing affordability issues in the market. Part of our program criteria is that the 20% of the units have to be accessible under the National Building Code standards, and the developers that receive this funding are required to maintain affordable rents for a time frame of 15 to 25 years. And that depends on the structure of their project, the number of units coming into the market, and just being sure that with the uncertainty of longer time frames that we're able to have access to units for the time frame that we're required to have them, but don't get into having units that 20 years out we don't necessarily need. I understand from reading the transcripts of the committee and some of your discussions regarding this program that you were looking specifically for, a bit of a status update in relation to the program. The activity we've experienced, we've had 28 applications from various types of developers, a lot of private, profit-oriented groups. We have 26 units, which is 5 projects that have been approved and are in various stages of moving forward. 12 of those units have been announced in the Tignish and Kensington areas, and we have 3 projects that haven't been announced yet. We're working through signing of agreements and dotting the I's and crossing the T's before we share that information with the public at large. We have had many inquiries in addition to the 28 applications we received, and it could be anything from clarifying program criteria to getting some feedback on particular projects and whether they might be considered for funding, and just working through those conversations with developers and being available to them. During the COVID pandemic, we have put the program on pause. And there's been a couple of reasons to do that. Initially, in relation to being able to reallocate resources to focus on the essential services that the division and the department and government overall is providing, and to provide COVID-specific programming. So, for example, Housing Services provided the temporary rental assistance benefit through our division. As we've monitored what's been going on in the market, we want to be able to have a look at the market and consider what reset needs to happen with our programs, have another look at the need in the community, and ensure that the programs that we're providing are relevant and will work in the current environment. However, we would want to note that we're continuing to work with the developers who have put in applications to the program. We're continuing to work with any developers that are inquiring about the program, and we're continuing to evaluate the applications that we've already received. As well, we're working on the other housing initiatives that are part of government's commitment to add 1,200 units to the affordable housing market over the next 5 years. And the Affordable Housing Development Program is an important tool in our toolbox to deliver affordable housing, but we will also have other tools such as mobile rental vouchers and government units that are being built through our capital budget. Okay. The other thing that we'd like to note is that there are a lot of things going on in the housing market right now. Just move back to my notes. We are obviously monitoring what's going on with immigration and the demand for units as we go forward. With the international borders closed, our international immigration is significantly different than it's been in other years. We also see that in terms of what the developers are doing on their own, the construction starts are significantly higher year to date than they were for all of last year, and our completions are continuing at a record high. So, to just give a little bit of detail on that, our third quarter completions in PEI are 953, compared to the entire year of 2019 of 768. So we're up 24% with the fourth quarter still to come in. The other thing that we realize is that we're seeing some of those short-term rentals converting back to long-term rentals, and some of that's, the impact of the summer's tourism season. So we recognize that that may be a short-term blip, but it is helping out in terms of providing some flexibility in the market for those looking for units. And the other thing, of course, that we're monitoring is that, especially with post-secondary education, that we're seeing more online options for students. So perhaps there's not as much pressure in the Charlottetown area for students who are coming into that market. So we're being very careful to make sure we understand what's going on out in the housing market and adjusting our approach as needed. So I think that's a very high-level look at where we are with the program. We want to be sure that we're strategic in terms of how we use the funding the government has provided to us for this program and for all of our housing initiatives. It's a good opportunity to stop and have that pause, ensure that we have a clear direction as we go forward in the new environment that we're operating within.
Okay, thanks for that presentation. This time, I guess we're going to open it up to questions from the committee.
Sure.
Yeah, Hannah?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sonia. It's good to see you again. Sorry, my phone's making noises here, so turn it off. So obviously we had asked for that briefing on the Affordable Housing Development Program, recognizing it is, part, as you'd mentioned there, of the kind of suite of activities around the Housing Action Plan. And you'd mentioned there the commitment to add 1,200 affordable housing units in the next 5 years, which was starting from 2018. So we're, I think, 2018. So we're 2019, 2018. So we're a couple of years into that. But when you talk about the Affordable Housing Development Program, you're talking about 26 units in this case. 26 developments or 26 units?
26 units.
So obviously 1,200 affordable and only 26 from this program. I guess when we'd asked you to come in last year, and asked for an update then on progress. You know, there were a number of different numbers that were stitched together. I think it was 283 is what I remember, but there was still kind of a big gap in terms of the plan. And then the other thing that we also talked about then is what affordable actually means. And you've mentioned that in this case, you know, you're asking developers to commit to affordable, but then you're also saying we're having to provide top-up funds through the rent subsidy program for them to actually hit that 25% national definition of affordable, the rent geared to income target. So why are we still, first of all, why are we still using a definition of affordable that actually doesn't align with CMHC? Same question I asked you last year. If we're giving out this kind of money, why are we not creating something that's sustainable? Because the rent subsidy is not a sustainable program. It doesn't create any capacity. So that's one thing, you're spending money twice. You're investing in the building and then you're having to subsidize to actually make it affordable. And the second question is, how are we going to get to 1,200 affordable units if we're doing a program and pausing it and it's only brought 26 into the market? So it's two main questions.
Okay, great. No, those are great questions. So in terms of the 1,200 units, like I mentioned, the Affordable Housing Development Program is really only one initiative that's part of the overall suite of initiatives to achieve that goal. So to date, government has announced 712 of those 1,200 units as being initiated, and that's just since April of last year in 2019. So in that 712 number, we do have the numbers, sorry, I should say 726 because some of those weren't announced yet for Affordable Housing Development Program. But we have committed to 100 new units through the capital budget. In addition, government has put in place 200 mobile rental vouchers up to the end of March 2020. And as part of the budget announcement for 2021, we are in the process of implementing another 400 mobile rental vouchers. So in slightly over 15 months, we're well on our way to achieving the goal of 1,200 affordability units in the market. In terms of the definition, so we actually are using the CMHC national definition in terms of affordability, but there are two elements to that definition. So the first side of it is in relation to what you would consider affordable unit in the market, so from the landlord's point of view. And in terms of that part of the definition, the affordable rate is based upon 80% of the median market rent in any given market. So that would be the metric that we'd use when we're using the calculation to determine what these landlords who are getting the Affordable Housing Development Program forgivable loans, what they would have to be charging us to create that affordable unit in the market. The second part of the definition is in regards to what is considered affordable for the tenant who is renting. And that metric is in relation to 30% of their gross household income. So we do realize that within that definition, the two numbers can kind of fly by each other. So that's why government provides that additional assistance to the client to get to the 30% household income metric. And I guess the other thing that I would note is that in PEI, we actually do provide a better benefit than the 30% national metric in that we charge tenants 25% of their gross household income.
Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. So 726 of those units initiated doesn't mean they're actually in the market. I know that some of those units is the building that's going up at UPEI, which is not going to be available for residency until 2023. It's a metal frame right now. So there's a big difference between units that are initiated and units that are actually available. There's still a huge gap between what we actually need. I'm strongly going to disagree that mobile rental vouchers equal affordable rental units. They are completely different things. Affordable rental unit is literally a physical unit that somebody can rent that they can afford, whatever the definition is, and we'll talk about that in a second. And I absolutely know we would have a more significant crisis in our housing situation if we didn't have those rental vouchers, but they are not sustainable. We are spending millions a year to ensure that people aren't homeless instead of actually addressing something on a longer term basis. And I know that that's painful to do financially because we have to do both. We have to invest in the and support the investment in actually developing the capacity, literally building the spaces, and support the difference between the market rate and the thing. But referring to mobile rental vouchers as affordable housing units is frankly disingenuous. And the language really matters. And I am absolutely appreciative of that program, but it is not an affordable housing program. It's a rental voucher that allows people to not be out on the street. And so the other aspect of that is the affordable from the landlord point of view, is a bit of a challenge because, again, we need those landlords. We need those private sector landlords and those private developers. They're the only ones building capacity because the province isn't. Not enough to make a difference. So absolutely, without them, we wouldn't be seeing the builds that are going up. But the average apartment going up in my district is $1,600 a month. And that's set by the market. So if the landlord's affordability definition is one that he can set based on what the market will bear, we are always going to be chasing an impossible goal. We are continually going to have to be matching that gap because wages are not equivalent to what it costs to rent an apartment. An average person working in minimum wage is going to spend 70% of their income on housing to get an apartment in my district right now. So the gap that the government's going to have to fill is only going to get bigger. So there are some real challenges with the language that we use, and you've heard me say this before, and I'm really sad that I'm here saying exactly the same thing I said to you last time we talked about it in this space, is that the words that we use to describe this really matter. We are not talking about the same thing when we talk about mobile rent vouchers and affordable housing units. We are not talking about the same thing. We talk about affordable to the tenant and affordable to the landlord. And so I'm not seeing a long-term plan on how we're actually going to provide affordable housing for those that need it. The builds, absolutely right, there's hundreds of apartments going up, but they're not affordable. And they're not going to be affordable. So back to the question that I asked you the same time last year is where are we with the action plan in terms of an actual new investment this year that isn't maintaining the status quo for another year? Where are we with the action plan in terms of getting to that target in the real world?
I just add, though, that on the mobile rental vouchers, that they do allow people to stay in their community. They do allow people to be close to their work, be close to their school, their daycare, where they're at today. It's not just about Charlottetown, it's about right across the island. We're not just looking specifically here. We know the cost to build has gone up. We know it's continued to go up. And we are working on many aspects of that, as Sonya had reiterated. We're doing our capital builds, but we're doing them across PEI. We're not just doing them in Charlottetown. We have to look across all islanders. We've got the Affordable Housing Development Program, as you mentioned, which is one aspect of it, but is strictly to incentivize builders to build where they weren't necessarily want to build. You've seen a big change in the landscape in the last 6 months. As she mentioned, there's record builds going on, record starts, record finishes, and that added into the increased vacancy. Although it's the high end that's being built, it allows people flexibility to move. It increases the supply in the marketplace and allows others then to go in, and it allows these people that have mobile vouchers to be able to have more choice as well, so they can choose to move. So you may think that it's disingenuous to say that a mobile voucher is not affordable. It does allow affordability. It does provide a gap today, because no matter what you want to do when you want to build, it's going to be over 2 years before they're built. And even today, they're struggling. You've increased cost to build, you've got shortage of labor, and you've also got a shortage of land in certain areas. So sometimes the mobile voucher is a great aspect and a great tool and gets it to the person that needs it today.
Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, earlier in my statement, I'm absolutely recognize that without mobile rental vouchers, we would be in a crisis. But we already have people rough sleeping now. But the idea of what would it look like if we didn't have those mobile rental vouchers is significant. And the impact that having that option to be able to bridge provides flexibility that just isn't in a market where our vacancy rate is at around 1%. So as you said earlier about the impact of short-term rentals potentially moving back in, the market is always shifting and changing, but for the last couple of years, we've had to talk about housing in PEI and across the province, not just in Charlottetown, as being in crisis. And the reflection of those rental vouchers is one of the things that has had to happen to address the fact that it's a crisis. It's not a long-term strategy. And so, you know, the concern is, as we move into sort of year 3 of the Housing Action Plan, is that we need to see more tangible long-term impacts that mean that we can gradually move that significant cost of the rental vouchers back into a space where they are truly emergency, rather than being a pillar of a housing strategy. Because, as I said, from a fiscal perspective, it's not a good plan, and it creates a huge amount of stress for the people who are administering it, for the people who are on the receiving end of it. It's bad enough not being able to find somewhere to live, but having to negotiate and get one of a limited number of available potential financial pieces of support, because there aren't enough vouchers to go around, same as there aren't enough houses to go around, is you're creating a competitive market within even how people get support. And it's incredibly difficult for people across the province. We have a role to make sure that we're doing something actively about that, and pausing a program, as small as this one is, doesn't send a signal that this is being taken as seriously as it should be. So it's a real concern. And again, the language that's used and recognizing the impact of that, we need to reflect how we support landlords to be part of our solution is absolutely part of the story, but we cannot ignore the story of what it feels like to be a tenant as well in this space. So, Chair, I have a number of other questions, but perhaps if I move on and I can come back to you later.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Brad?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for coming in here on a Friday afternoon on a long weekend. It's great to see you, of course. So, I mean, Hannah was talking about some things there about how, you know, there's an affordable housing crisis and there's, you know, not enough housing, and we have a more need and more demand than there is supply, and these sorts of things. So maybe I missed this in the presentation, but you know, what is the need for affordable housing? Have we tried to determine that? And if we did, how did we determine that? And then, you know, what makes it a crisis?
So we do keep a registry of people who are interested in social housing, and that's our primary indicator in terms of what the demand is, in terms of what government needs to provide for support for those islanders who are in most vulnerable situations. And you know, that's really what we've based our commitments for, and government's commitments on, in terms of the 1,200 units and looking at getting those into the market over the 5 years.
Brad?
So that registry you're talking about, so how many people or how many families, however you want to quantify it, are actually on that list today?
So in terms of that registry, a couple of points that I'd make about it is that one, everyone who's, I shouldn't say everyone, most people who are on that registry, they're not sleeping rough, they're not homeless, they are facing particular concerns in terms of affordability, being underhoused in terms of not having perhaps enough bedrooms in their unit, or having issues in terms of the state of repair of the unit. For the most part, they are all living somewhere now, and it's about getting that affordability to them, which is, again, why the mobile rental vouchers is very important in the short term especially. I lost track of the second part of your question, sorry.
How many people on the wait list is the question?
Yeah, how many people on the registry, yeah. What are we talking about?
So we're looking at about in the 1,000 range, but we are currently touching base with all of those clients, especially knowing that we have had some changes in expectations and with needs through our COVID pandemic. We also know that we have clients that perhaps apply, are determined to be eligible, and then their circumstances change and they don't tell us. So when we do phone them up and ask them, you know, are you ready for a unit, we find out that perhaps they've moved on to community care or long-term care if they're a senior. perhaps their circumstances have changed if they're a family and they're in better economic circumstances. And so we typically touch base with everyone on their anniversary date. This year, that's been a little bit delayed because of COVID and delivering other programming. But we're currently going through a process to contact everyone on that registry to ensure that, one, we have a good, strong number going forward to fit into our planning for our capital budget and to fit into our operational budget planning for next year and future years, but also to make sure that we understand what their need is. And that can change in terms of someone who used to have a pet and no longer has a pet, and that opens up options for them. It can be that their income level has changed and perhaps they're no longer eligible for the program. It could be something as simple as, I've quit smoking and now there are more options available as well. So we want to make sure that we truly understand the needs out there so that we can better address them.
Brad?
So of those approximately 1,000 people that are on the registry, like how many of them would be in like really dire need of housing, whether that be because their current housing is too small or in disrepair? Like how many of them are, you know, really in dire need? Is that something you can quantify?
Yeah, I can't give you specific numbers. There's various levels of need throughout the list. So we have everybody in terms of somebody who could be $1 over on the affordability range to somebody that could be what you'd call in severe core housing need because they pay 50% of their income towards housing. We would also have perhaps some individuals on there that are, I'm not going to say perhaps, I know we do have individuals on there who are couch surfing, who perhaps have a place to go now, but they're living, you know, a daughter and her children living with her parents in a small unit, and it's not ideal, but they're in a safe place for tonight, and we need to continue to work on finding them their permanent home.
Brad Trivers?
So, I mean, I know you don't necessarily have the numbers with you, but is that something, I mean, it sounds like you can sort of quantify. If you're couch surfing, you're on that list, obviously. To me, that's a dire need. If you're spending more than 50% of your income, you know, we could draw those lines and say, these are the criteria, these are the number of people. Have you done that? Are those numbers you can bring back? Is that something that you can calculate?
Yes, so I mean, we do collect that information and have it. Once we finish our work with touching base with clients to make sure that that starting point list is complete and correct, then we would be, you know, chunking that up into those various categories to kind of determine, okay, where's the next steps on each of the different population groups based on those needs.
Brad Trivers?
So, I'm just want to make sure I understand this. So we've got 1,000 people on the list right now that are waiting for affordable housing. Some are in really dire need of it. Some of them, you know, are at the lower end of the need scale. Like they're able to survive at least reasonably well with what they're at. But how many? Like, so we're building 1,200 units though over the next 5 years for 1,000 people. I'm trying to understand the numbers here and how they match up.
Sonya?
Yeah. So we also recognize that, you know, we're comparing 1,200 to 1,000, that our demographics are changing and that there's going to be future demand. We also know that in terms of our own housing stock, some of our buildings could be getting close to their end of life, so we have to be planning for that as well. And we know that, you know, in the private market, we might have individuals that are in units that aren't in the best repair. So we have to be able to think about how we address the three elements of core housing need, that one being affordability, one being the state of repair of the unit, and the other being having the correct number of spaces for the household.
Okay, perfect. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. Sonya, you mentioned that, you know, most of the people who are on the social housing registry are not homeless. I kind of building off of Minister Trivers, you know, I think it's hard to really have a meaningful discussion about this until we have a better sense of what the numbers are in terms of how many people are homeless, how many people are couch surfing. Like, you know, are we talking about women, families? You know, what are the situations that we are looking at here. But I want to just go back to those who are homeless or who are very vulnerable to become homeless at any moment. So I would put the couch surfing people who are experiencing that in that category as well. You know, winter is approaching, and I'm wondering how we're going to be addressing homelessness, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So our approach this winter is going to be very similar to last winter in that, you know, a lot of the initiatives to provide those supports are in place. We're continuing our relationships with Bedford McDonald House and Blooming House. And we are continuing our emergency 1-800 line so that people who are experiencing immediate emergency housing issues can have a single point of entry, that they're not having to make multiple phone calls to try to get initial assistance. That line, you know, provides a triage function that kind of walks people through, you know, where are you tonight? Are you safe tonight? Do you have options for tonight? And then, you know, if they don't, to help them make contact and get access to the shelter system. Then, you know, start working on that longer term connection to say, okay, you're okay for tonight in terms of being in a shelter, but what are the other services? So do you need to come and apply for social housing? Do you have, you know, mental health and addictions issues that we need to connect you to those services? Are you eligible for social assistance? Have you talked to the folks in that program? So we start with that piece and continue that work as people are in the shelters. We also have a community outreach center, which in the short term is at Smith Lodge, and will be moving to a new home because that search is in progress. But we have a group of 12 committee members who work to manage that location. And I mean, government is one of those groups. There are 11 community partners around the table working very closely and very hard to understand what the needs are and ensure that the services that they provide through their organizations are available to anyone who's experiencing emergency housing issues. The other piece that we're working very diligently on, and we'll see that come to fruition later this fall, is that we have 20 transitional beds opening at Smith Lodge. So, you know, an important piece is that in order to have those emergency beds available at the shelter is that we can't have it become a bottleneck that people come into the shelter and remain there. So we need to have the next step, whether it's transitional housing with wraparound supports or whether it's moving to a permanent location in social housing or in the private market altogether. We're continuing to implement the recommendations of our community needs assessment. I would admit that there's a couple of pieces in there around training, both for government staff, but also with our community partners, that has been sidelined during COVID, and we're looking at how we get that back on track in a safe face-to-face way or a safe online way over the upcoming months. I think that's a decent overview, but I'm sure you'll have questions for more details.
Yes. Go ahead, David.
Just to kind of summarize a little bit from what both of you have mentioned, or maybe all three, is the registry that it is being reevaluated. We're looking at right now. We hope to have a very better outlook on it by the end of the month. But as we move into the winter season, and whether we are or not, those that are on the registry that are in the most dire need will be given a mobile voucher. They may be moved into, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, about 130 some odd new units that are going to be available by December 31st of this year across the island again. We'll have another maybe 50 or so by end of March. So when we talk homeless, I mean, if they are couch surfing or in a situation that's not safe and secure, they would score the highest on the registry and they would be taken care of the soonest. So that is our goal, is to make sure that those that are in dire need are taken care of first. Ideally, it can't be, one for one. You have to go through the registry, see what fits both geographically and for the person themselves. So when we have these new 132 units on, that's going to take up a vast majority of those that you're saying are on the list. And if not, we have the mobile vouchers to accommodate them. With the increase in supply now that we're seeing in the marketplace as well, it's going to allow us to find other places and accommodations for them. So the goal really is for us to make sure that there is everybody taken care of and they're in a safe and secure environment before winter.
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. Just expanding a bit on the situation with shelters, are there any additional provisions being provided to support shelters in social distancing?
Yes, so we've been working very closely with the shelters to identify what their needs are and ensure that they have access to some of the various funds that are out there. There's funding that government has provided to the United Way to support organizations during COVID, as well from the federal government's national housing strategy for the section for homelessness, Reaching Home. They've provided additional funding through our community entity partner, the John Howard Society. And, we're working very closely and staying in close contact with the shelters and with the service providers to best understand their needs and assist them with pressures.
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. And of course, in Summerside, we have a desperate need for emergency shelters in Summerside. This is not news. We've brought this up previously as well several times. Are there plans for shelters in Summerside?
Yes. That's a great question. Actually, we have a more in-depth community needs assessment currently being prepared for the Summerside and the Prince County area. We're working with the consultant on that. They received funding to do this work through the Community Housing Fund, which is a partnership between government and Canadian Mental Health Association. And we hope to have that final study in the upcoming weeks. We have had discussions with a couple of different groups in the Summerside area that brought us some ideas in terms of what they felt the need was, and we made sure that those groups were part of the stakeholder consultations, or they were invited to be part of the stakeholder consultations. Whether they participated or not was up to them, but for this assessment they were invited to be part of that process. So we're really looking forward to hearing what comes out of that so that we can fine-tune what the response needs to be. I guess our initial concern was is it about shelter beds in the Summerside area? Is it about transitional housing in the Summerside area? Is it about connections to other services, or a mix of all three? So that will really help us to go forward and do better planning in the western part of PEI.
Trish?
So, I'm glad to hear that's underway. Again, winter is approaching though, so how will you be supporting Islanders in the Summerside and West Prince area who may be experiencing homelessness? What will they do?
So like other years, we will continue to support them to access the services that are currently in the Charlottetown area. We have provided transportation to individuals who have experienced short-term housing to make sure that they have someplace to go. We have used the motel option, which it's not the ideal option, and it's not the option that we want to go forward in for the long term, but we want to make sure that people do have someplace that's safe to go on any given evening if they're stuck for emergency housing. So yes, we have been providing transportation. The other thing we've been doing is that we've been monitoring what the uptake is from various areas so that we can understand the volume, and which will also help us determine what resources have to be invested in each area.
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned the motel option and then also supporting people for transportation to get to access services in Charlottetown. And I think that, for someone who's experiencing homelessness, the last thing that they need is to have to leave, go away at least an hour to a different community, leave perhaps. They might have employment or supports in that community. So I think it's very important that we are supporting people to stay closer to home than having to go to Charlottetown. That just disrupts them further. And it makes it harder for people to be able to get back on their feet. So the motel option, what I had heard from constituents last year is that they weren't provided in emergency situations an option to stay in a motel in the Summerside area, but again, we're moved to Charlottetown. Is that, I can't understand why that would be necessary. Do we not have partnerships with motels in the Summerside area to support emergency needs over the winter?
It would depend on the individual circumstance and how that was triaged. I mean, I can't speak to every case or any case in particular, but, you know, I would understand that, yes, some would have accessed hotels in the Charlottetown area as opposed to in the Summerside area.
Trish?
So just to clarify, do you have, is that a possibility though at this point? Do you have a relationship with motels or hotels in the Summerside area to offer emergency housing supports if needed?
We don't have a specific relationship, but we don't have a specific relationship with a hotel in the Charlottetown area either. We will look at what's available on any given evening, so.
Okay.
Trish?
So if there are options available in Summerside, why would they not be utilized? I mean, I think we can sort of narrow this down to one case, but it's not just one case. I'm hearing that this is just not an option, that people, if they're in an emergency situation, have to go to Charlottetown. And that, as I said, is not the best option.
Yeah, and I can take that back for further work with the committee, just to see, you know, what the numbers look like and to better understand how that plays out. It's a good point. It definitely is a good point in terms of people being able to stay closer to their community and where they work. But I would highlight that the shelter option in Charlottetown is on an emergency and a short-term basis, so our ultimate goal would be to move people back to their community where they want to be and need to be as quickly as possible. There's a difference between what I need to do tonight versus where I'm going to be tomorrow night or in 3 nights' time.
I'll just ask one
Trish?
more, Chair, and then we can move on. But yes, certainly, and I think that, you know, there are many cases where someone might find themselves in an emergency housing situation where it's, you might be one night or a few nights or you know, beyond that, where if we aren't able to keep them in their community, then it's going to further disrupt their lives. And since we're already using motels, it is confusing to me why we wouldn't be keeping people as close to home, since we do have, you know, motels across the island. So thank you for bringing that back, and I do hope that we see some progress on that right away, and hopefully, you know, most certainly soon with shelter options for the Summerside area. I mean, this is not a new situation. I'm glad to hear that it's now being studied in terms of you know, feasibility and what resources are needed. But I'm surprised that we're still at a stage where we're studying this. It seems to me we should be well aware of what those needs are at this point to start moving things forward. That's all I'll say for now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Sonya?
Yeah, no, and I would just comment, you know, if we go back 3 winters ago, the situation in terms of what was being provided is very different from where we are now. It certainly has evolved, and it feels like, you know, we started off very broadly in terms of, well, let's get some solutions out there and learn from them. And then we moved into the community needs assessment, which was kind of a broader understanding of what was going on in the market. We narrowed it down a little bit more and continue to narrow it as we understand what the needs are in particular communities. So, you know, we'll be continuing to do that. And, you know, one of the reasons that it's very difficult to give definite answers is that there is a very significant lack of data across the province in terms of what the scope of the issue is and what the breadth of the issue is. So, you know, what's the volume and what are the various needs and the complexity of those needs that we're trying to address. So it is evolving and it will continue to evolve, but we're certainly dedicated to try to understand it.
One more quick follow-up just to that. Thank you
Trish?
for that. Can you tell me why there's a lack of data? Can you explain that?
Some of it is in relation to different organizations tracking things in different ways, using different definitions, not necessarily having the resources behind them to spend time on data collection and sharing. One thing that is going on, and it's attached to the federal Reaching Home strategy, is the implementation of something called coordinated access. And we're working with the John Howard Society and our community partners to implement that. And what it will provide is, one, a good data tracking system, which will allow us to better understand the need and then focus resources more appropriately. Secondly, it will help in terms of making those definitions, in terms of when we say we're talking about somebody that's homeless, well, what are we really talking about? And we're all using the same language and we're communicating in the same way. But thirdly, it will also help organizations to understand who is the lead at any particular client situation, so that clients don't get lost in running from organization to organization to receive service. So it kind of helps hone in the approach so that we're more efficient and have a better use of resources, but most importantly, it's more streamlined for the client, who shouldn't have to face these difficulties when they're in a vulnerable situation. So where we will be once coordinated access is implemented is different again from where we are now, and as I've said, it's continuing to evolve.
Heath McDonald?
Just a few questions on, you had 50 units, I think is the total for the 2.45 or $4,500, or $45,000 per unit. You said 25 of those units are remaining to utilize the remainder of that money? Is that?
So there's 26 units allocated, so 24 remaining, yes. Okay.
And you have a bunch in the queue now to review the files? Where's the location of those? Like, where are they? Is it relevant to density of PEI, or is it rural PEI, or where's the?
In terms of the applications that we're still reviewing, or the applications we've approved?
No, review.
Right across. Reviewed to date? I mean, right across the province.
So is there anything in the criteria as far as density population on the numbers that you have saying, here's the need in, I know there's 6 going to Rustico, so there's a need in Rustico. Cornwall had, 30 a year ago, so there was a need there. So how are you evaluating those remaining 24 units?
So we're tying that to the needs in our social housing registry.
Okay.
Heath?
So since our government, former government, worked with you guys very closely, in the last year or so of that government, are these the projects, David, that you're talking about, or that are coming to fruition now that are being built, that are ready, like you said, maybe by the end of the year? Like, I can list some of these off by memory, and you guys likely know better than I do, but there was 9 in Summerside, 12 in Alberton, 12 in O'Larry. The CMHA building on Kent Street with 30 units is not considered, obviously. 30 in Cornwall are done. There was 20, I think, in Surrey. There was CMHA building on the Kensington, or St. Peter's Road, a building on Beach Grove Road, the transition building. I don't know what else is out there. Stratford and Montague. Are any of those units ready to be put people in, or are they done, or O'Larry, Alberton?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, given that it takes, a good 2 years to get from your design phase to the building actually opening, we are talking about units that are coming on that were initiated 2 years ago. However, out of the new commitment of 1,200 units, we have initiated 712 of those, including the mobile rental vouchers, and continue to plan in terms of our capital budget, in terms of what the next units will be.
They're not actually built there in your.
You've got to commit, you have to start somewhere in terms of making the commitment and starting through the process to actually get the units built.
So
Heath?
in the strategy from 2018, I think Hannah touched on it, there was 1,200 new units. And you're saying there's 700 more under the present government that you're working on?
So in the initial strategy, there were 1,000 affordable units, which all of those have been committed to in some form or another, and some of those are coming online now in terms of, some are open and some are coming online in the upcoming months. Of the 1,200 that were committed to in last April with the new government, 726 of those are initiated.
Heath?
How many have shovels in the ground out of those 726?
Sorry. Of those 700, thank you, Chair, I'm sorry.
I have to signal Van,
Yes,
but
I know.
you're just free to talk.
Friday afternoons. Yes, so of those 700, 600 of those are mobile rental vouchers. 200 of them are in place. Another 400 of those were approved in the budget that was just passed in July. So we're in the process of lining those up and getting them out the door to people that are in need of affordable housing. The 100 capital builds, one of those is there's 52 of those units that we have gone to tender for the prime consultant to do the design, and that will be awarded shortly. We are in the process of looking and finalizing land details for the remaining 48 units that's part of the 100. And then we have the Affordable Housing Development Program ones that are at various stages. Some announced, some started. Actually, a couple opening soon, December.
Heath?
So in terms of actual, and I don't want to get into the numbers, but I know the 6 in Rustico that are started and almost done. How many are at that stage? How many are actually being built in the last year and a half that are actually without planning and RFPs and tenders? I just want to know how many are there.
In terms of the ones that have to be built,
700. The 1,200 that you're talking about, not including the 700 or 600 mobile vouchers or anything. I just want to know if there's any that are actually ready by year end to open the doors. Or, well, maybe not year end. How many are started? Like literally built?
so,
It takes 2 years to build something, and these were just done. They're obviously not built. They're going through the process to be built. So if we're talking 600 mobile vouchers, we're in the design phase to do the capital builds. So that's where we're at with those right now. I mean, and that will be a process again. That's why it's over a 5-year plan. You can only do so much every year. And every year we're going into capital discussions right now for more projects which will take place and won't be built for another three or 4 years.
Thank you.
Heath?
So on your, when you're doing affordable housing, and I think maybe Sonya, you and I might have talked or touched on this at one point or another, everything is based on tax returns, on income side, whether you qualify for housing or not. And I've had a couple incidents where their life changed due to, for example, one person's spouse died of cancer. One person was working part-time, which was over the age of 65, but then couldn't work. So their income levels changed mid-year. But every time they'd go to get subsidized for housing, for rent subsidies or something, they were being based on their previous tax return, which in essence at the present time is not the same as what their actually income is coming in. Is that department or your department or wherever, is that something that can be changed? It's a policy, obviously. It's not a legislation. Wouldn't something like that individually be reviewed on a one-on-one basis as opposed to putting them all in the same category?
our policy is that an applicant on the registry can update their circumstances at any time, including changes to their income. And our policy is that tenants in our units can update their income at any time and have their rent adjusted.
Okay, 'cause that's not what I was referencing as far as these people, because they seem to keep coming back saying, Heath, our income's not this, and we can't access a rent subsidy, and so on. So anyway, I will take it back to them, and maybe I'll direct the questions directly to you. I know immigration, just recently, the Premier was announcing, I think it was over 600 and some people or something that qualified for, or they're qualifying for immigration. And we have a new bill to post-secondary going up. So I'm not, I don't think that the immigration's gonna slow down that much. And as David said, it takes 2 to 3 years to build these. So I'm not sure why we would be pausing or using immigration as a deterrent to progress additional units for housing. So I guess my question is do you think that's an actual good reference, or is it?
So we would expect that immigration will eventually return to what historically was normal. What we're seeing here is that this will be a short-term blip. At the same time, we're still seeing unprecedented numbers of starts and completions in the housing market. And I think what we have to be cautious of is ensuring that developers understand that the short-term blip in immigration is short-term, so that we don't end up with a low vacancy rate, that we want developers to continue to develop. That being said, we have to kind of recognize that immigrants generally aren't the population that government is building for. So they're not our clients on our social housing registry. So it's a different end of the market.
Heath?
Really got one more. So something else, I mean, that I know that a couple of developers' question is the $45,000 per door. So building costs have gone up over 30% or more in the past year. And I believe when the previous government was there, at some point we were at $60 a door or 65, I can't quite remember, but I'm just wondering, has there been any adjustments on that $45,000 a door for those people that want to build those housing units because of the inflation basically on the cost of materials?
So the program has only existed for a year, and that was the rate set at the time that the program was created. Given that we are in a pause and looking at what the needs are in the market and better making sure that we understand those needs, it is an opportunity to look at the other program criteria to see if there is anything that needs to be adjusted. So, I mean, that's a factor that we would look at as we do that. So, we're not making any commitment to make any changes, but we certainly will be looking at the program and how it operates.
That's good, thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. I might ask a couple and then we'll start around again. You say this whole thing, you're the affordable housing section, but you're talking about being in a pause and looking at different avenues. It's kind of there is a problem in Charlottetown and in Prince Edward Island. You look at the numbers that were just out recently, that Prince Edward Island population is going up to 160,000 people. That's not slowing down. There is need for this. I don't understand if you guys are in a pause or if this was COVID related. Was this strictly COVID related that you're in a pause?
Just kind of goes back full circle, is that beginning in March, we had a very low vacancy rate and this program was in process, and you're talking about the Affordable Housing Development Program. We did need to pause the program because of resources and what was happening, including the building. We didn't know what builders would be allowed to go out. We didn't know what kind of labor was going to be there, et cetera. As we broached into the later part of the summer, we realized that the marketplace had changed since March, that vacancy rates were going to be higher, that construction builds were continuing on, that immigration was lower, that the short-term market, the tourist market was down, short-term rentals are being converted into long-term rentals, and all these are playing a factor in when we're trying to evaluate the program. All we did was really put a pause on the intake. We had a lot of applications in process. We wanted to review those applications to make sure that they were going to be used accordingly and properly right across the island, because there's a lot of places where there's building not going on that we need to have building. we've referenced an area in Rustico. There's areas across the island where we need to incentivize builders to go build, where there's not building taking place. In Charlottetown, there's a lot of building taking place. Yes, it's on the high-end market because that's the cost to build today. So, but that'll allow the supply to open up. But this is not, it was put in place partially because of COVID, because we need to reallocate resources and because we didn't know what was going on in the building area. We contacted and talked to all the people that had put an application in, and they were very familiar with what was going on.
Yeah, and this is a good discussion. But when COVID paused, I guess I'm on the ground in my area, and I don't see one place. There's many people that live in my area that can't get into those rental vouchers, and when a unit comes available, there's 40 and 50 people applying for one room. So there's a very your argument is set on more of a conservative approach to this problem, and I see a different story being told on the doorsteps. So, you look at the private numbers, the 953 versus last year's 768, they're not stopping to build, but I look at this affordable section and we're slowing this down. And I just don't, these numbers, 28 applicants, I guess my question with that would be, out of the 28 applicants, there's 5 projects approved, 3 projects ready to approve. That's 8 out of 28. How long is each applicant with your area? How long, on average, is an application? Has it been with you guys for a while?
So I can't give you exact stats in terms of the time frame. The program only opened a year ago, and so that's a little bit difficult to say. It's not like there's a trend attached to that, but the amount of time that it's with us will depend on how clear the proposal is, how many times we have to go back to the developer and get additional information. We actually do some negotiations with the developers, so if we're looking at a particular geographical location and what they propose doesn't exactly fit with what our needs are in the area, we'll go back to them and say, well, would you consider doing families as opposed to seniors, or would you consider single units as opposed to 1 2-bedroom units? So as we work through those processes, it takes us time to kind of have those conversations. It takes them time to go back and kind of look at their proposal and decide what they're willing to do. We have announced, I shouldn't say, we have approved 26 in that year time frame, and that includes, the conversations we've had with developers on the initial end to say, here's what the program's about, and helping them understand what the criteria are, and then getting the applications and moving through them and having those negotiations. So I can't give you an exact timeline that it takes. It varies.
Just for one example, one that we're working on that we just approved recently has been over 3 months. So that'll give you a good indication. And a lot to what Sonya's mentioned. There's a lot of back and forth to make sure that it fits the program. Just to add to another point too, if I may, like the Affordable Housing Development Program allows us to get access to units where we might not otherwise get access to them. So again, out in the regional areas, rural areas, right now in Charlottetown, Summerside, there's a lot of building going on. So we have access to those units if we need to make, where we can offer a mobile voucher and get it in place. So if there are people that are out there that are on the registry, they're in need, we have access to those units now.
And I'll just be honest with you, as a young person coming to this, I'm worried because when you talked about 2 year to build, when this program gets delayed, that delays the whole cycle another year. I mean, if these get approved even next week, in the next few weeks or whatever time frame, how are the builders going to operate? Now you're looking at another cycle. So it's just it's those type of things that I look at, and I look at. On your mandate letter, the first thing on your mandate letter, implement measure to address the realities of the current housing situation in PEI and to improve availability and affordability. I mean, that's number one. So, and then we're in this committee today, and it feels like there's just reasons why not to do that. So that's where I am, and I'm getting a little bit wound up, but I'm going to pass it over, unless you want to comment on those.
I might just add a comment again, that it is, the Affordable Housing Development Program is just one program in all of it.
Yeah.
And again, it's specified at trying to get access to market units that would not be otherwise accessible.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Sonia, sorry.
And I would say, you know, I think if you're going to address the needs in the market, you need to make sure you understand the needs in the market. And, you know, COVID has changed what's going on in the market. So to pause and to make sure we get what that is about will help us in the long term and perhaps save us some time in the long term. And in the short term, we have the mobile rental vouchers to help us with that affordability issue.
Okay, perfect. I'll pass it to Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back to a couple of things regarding the registry. The first thing is that, you know, as the Chair, my colleague stated, there were very clear commitments made around housing for the department and in the Housing Action Plan, and given that Housing Action Plan's been in place now, we're coming into year 3, the lack of data or the inability to be able to sort of articulate not just sort of really basic data like how many people are we talking about and who are they, and on a demographic basis, but also, you know, as my colleague Trish said, you know, to be needing to reassess at this point when again we're going into year 3 of needing emergency housing shelters is really shocking. It's one of the key things that underpinned a number of action items in the Housing Action Plan, and without that data you can't do most of the other things that are in there, or if you're doing them, you're doing them based on some kind of intangible space. So the registry is a really important part of that, and to hear that you don't know even how many generally are on it, or how you're not able to share who they are or what criteria you use. For us on the other end of that, we're talking to people every single day who are asking, how do I get on the registry? Who do I call? What happens when I get there? How long will it be? You know, or I've been on the registry for 5 years and I've never heard anything. Or I got turned down because of this criteria and I don't understand it. What you're saying is that you don't have that information either. Or if you are, you're not prepared to share it. So you're making decisions about who gets support or not based on what? What are you making your decisions based on? If you don't have that information, how are you making informed decisions?
So every year, we go back to the people on the registry and check and make sure that we understand what their needs are, that their circumstances haven't changed, and so that we can make good decisions based on up-to-date data. We would admit that this year we are behind because we delivered other programs during the COVID early stages of COVID. So in terms of the registry, we know we have to keep that data up to date. Otherwise, we make poor decisions about who receives the benefit and about where we need to create units and how many units we need to create and what types of units. So I wouldn't say we don't have that information. I'd say you constantly and consistently have to be on top of gathering the information from clients, from the applicants, so that we do make good decisions. In terms of the emergency housing side, we work very closely with community partners, all of whom have different levels of capacity and different systems and, you know, other goals and priorities than the ones perhaps that we are asking them to support us on. So, you know, they have different things on different days that they're working on. But those are very important community partners, and we're committed to working with them and moving everyone in that continuum along to be able to provide better service to these vulnerable populations.
Except that you just blame those community partners for not giving you the data that you need in a previous answer. I mean, you know, words matter, and those relationships with those community partners are a critical part of this story. So if they matter to you, then it might be good to perhaps speak about them with a little bit more appropriate nature to the value of the work that they do, because those community partners did step into spaces when government didn't. Blooming House is, for example, is a private non-profit organisation that started up in the absence of there being any government-funded women's shelter since 1992 or whenever the last time the one closed, 97 when it closed. And that happened because government did not and would not step into that space. There community partners are critical, and we need to respect the work that they do. It is not their fault that they're not giving you data, or that they're not seen as being sort of a partner in the data piece if you haven't been able to sort of clearly state to them what it is that they should be providing. And after 2 years or into year 3 of an emergency housing action plan, to not be able to come into a meeting like this today and give us a point in time that says, here's what we know about the housing situation in PEI in terms of the people on the list, I just don't understand why you would do that, why you would come in here today and not be able to tell us. Because we know anecdotally it's about 1,000 people. We've been talking through email with you and your department over a number of years, and it's always around 1,000 people. And we can talk about who those people are. Anecdotally, we know it's seniors who don't have enough money. We know it's people on social assistance. We know it's families in need, and it's ordinary people who fall on hard times. It's so many different stories. But this is your job. And we're asking you to give us information so that we can then develop policy and financial asks and support in the House in favour of things that will help move this forward. And instead we're in this really difficult space of continually having to battle for every piece of information that we get from you, when what we're talking about is people's right to a safe place to live. We're just coming from such different spaces, and I really don't know why you wouldn't come in here today with that information for us. It's baffling. And data is bored. For me, feel like it's boring and it doesn't, but it really matters for us to make informed decisions. So I don't have the confidence when I talk to somebody who's in a housing situation, I don't have the confidence that I can say that these decisions are being made. Because without that transparency, we don't know how you make decisions on who gets support and who doesn't, to my colleague's point. And I would really like you to be able to bring that back here to the committee as soon as possible. I'd like the information on the registry, how many are on the registry at this point in time, what kind of demographics they are, and what criteria you are using to make funding decisions for people in terms of the top-up mobile vouchers or any other decisions around subsidy supports. Chair. Good for now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sure, absolutely, Sonya.
Yeah, so a couple of points there. I'd like to go back first to our community partners, and it's not a matter of us blaming them. It's a recognition that they have limited capacity and limited resources, and we are there working with them to work through those situations. They need our support to be able to provide that data, and that's what we're doing now. And it does take time to work through all those issues, and we do have an amazing group of community partners. They have come to the table, and we do need to be there to support them, and that's what we're doing. In terms of how we make decisions as to who gets benefits, it is based on the need of the individuals and how they rate in terms of what their income levels are, what assets they have available to go towards their care, their health situation, the percentage of their income that they're paying towards housing costs, the state of repair of the housing that they're currently in, and whether they're underhoused. So all of those factors go into making that decision. In order to make sure that we're picking the people that are in greatest need, we have to make sure that we have that information in the registry. And we know that, which is why we're going through that and making sure that everything is as up to date as possible. We know that we were behind this year because of COVID, but normally we would be having these conversations with individuals on the anniversary of their application date. So, I agree with you. We need to have good data. We need to be able to support how we make decisions. And we have to be clear with clients in terms of why or why not they're receiving a benefit.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sonya. Thanks, Steve. We'll move to Brad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. And, today's discussion has focused around, the need for critical housing. Colleague Trish had brought up, people that need this emergency shelter housing. And it seems to me like the vouchers, mobile rental vouchers, are designed to handle that as well, as other emergency measures. But really, when it comes to affordable housing, I'm kind of interested in some of the other, tools in the toolbox. The The one that I think makes a lot of sense, and I probably raised this before, is this down payment assistance program. And I know the prices of land and of homes are going up, but if you do the calculations with our low interest rates, even if you have people making minimum wage within a household, and if you just do a quick search of available properties on the island, I mean, it was a great program brought in by the previous administration. And I'm curious as to the uptake of that. I'm not sure if we're prepared to talk about that today. And you know, why can't we, you know, use programs like that to provide affordable housing? And I know I'm looking at my colleagues around here, and you know, we've got you know, Cornwall, and we've got a couple of Charlottetown MLAs, and so it may mean, guess what? It may mean you're not living in downtown Charlottetown anymore, but there's land and there's houses, and there, even if you're working minimum wage, especially if you have two people in a household making minimum wage, you can qualify for this down payment assistance program, I think, and then you can own your own house. And I mean, by my calculations, about $600 a month would be the affordable rent if you're on minimum wage, working full-time, that is, you know, getting 37.5 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. So you get two people in a household, that's $1,200, and you know, I think there's opportunities out there. It may not be right in Charlottetown. Maybe people will have to travel. I mean, I know I live out in a rural area, and I travel, and it just seems to me that this is a solution that maybe is one of those tools that is being used to help out. And so I guess that's my first question. Are you seeing uptake on that? Is it something that we're missing the boat on? Should we see more uptake? What do you think about the down payment assistance program?
So it is one of the tools in the toolbox. It is a finance PEI program, so they would have to provide, yeah. Yeah. So we do get some regular updates from them in terms of that, but they really should speak to their program.
Do you want to speak to that, Dave? Okay.
Making sure that was, yeah.
Okay. Brad?
All right, and so maybe, well, I'll bring that up later as something that you know, our standing committee should look at getting some more information about. I don't know if we've really talked about that much in standing committee here, but the other thing is, when we're talking about affordable housing, it seems to me that a lot of the folks who are having a hard time with it, and you know, are folks who are on social assistance, right? And we know that there are a lot of jobs out there that, you know, employers are looking for people. And it'd be really nice to be able to take people on social assistance they can do and get them into those positions, you know, and I think it would really help with their ability to afford housing as well. And I mean, we talked about mobile rental vouchers, those make sense for people on a social assistance, I think, and I'm not sure I understand the perspective of my colleague Hannah on that one, and how they're not an actual viable solution for affordable housing, because I really think they are. But what percentage of people on the registry would be on social assistance versus those that would be in like low income sort of jobs? Can you comment on that?
So again, once we kind of churn through getting the registry updated, we'll have a more solid number on that, but historically it's been more in about a third of the registry would be social assistance clients as well.
Brad? Okay. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. So I have to go back to data. How do you, let's take it a step back. How do you keep track of the information on the registry? Do you have an online form? Are you saving it somewhere? Like, I don't understand how you couldn't possibly have access to the data, like just the basic information to bring us today. I'm so sorry, I'm really confused about that.
So to be very precise, we use the Microsoft Access database.
Okay.
The information from our application and assessment form is entered in that. What we're working on right now is that some of those applications and some of those assessments are out of date. So if you applied this time last year, you would be due for a check-in if no other circumstances have changed and you haven't contacted us to say, my circumstances have changed, please update my file, it would be time for us to contact with you. So through the year, as, especially from March until now with COVID, we haven't had the opportunity to check in on those anniversary dates. So we know that we would have clients whose circumstances have changed, they have not contacted us, and we need to update that so we can reassess what the level of need is throughout the registry.
Trish?
All right, so with that disclaimer that you have not been able to do the anniversary date updates as normal, could you not bring us the most up-to-date data that you have available as of even last year? Could we not have that information?
With that disclaimer, we have that information. I just wouldn't want to rely on it in terms of this is what we're making a decision based on. We need to have better up-to-date information to go forward.
Trish?
And so this is, this is the concern, or serious concern I have about this, that you are making decisions based on that data, though. So to suggest that that is not data that you could share with us is very confusing. You stated that the Affordable Housing Development Program, you are just making decisions over which projects will and won't be supported based on the need in a given area. So you must have a clear sense, clear definitions of, first of all, how you're defining need. You had identified that there aren't shared definitions between community organizations that you work with, and that's part of the problem why you couldn't provide data or information to us today. But that's really a question of, the ability for you to communicate effectively with other partner organizations. Yes, you do need those shared definitions, and that is something you need to work on, but there are definitions that are being used to make decisions. And so therefore you do have data that you could be sharing with us. I just can't understand, just basic information such as, how are you assessing level of need, which you are clearly doing because you're making decisions about programs and access to programs based on need. So I don't know. I don't even know how to ask this question again. But it's just very surprising. I'll just ask one more question. About an area in my district about Slemon Park. So there's new housing going up in Slemon Park, but it's not affordable housing. It's not through social development and housing. It's through economic development. And I'm pleased to see new housing going up there, most certainly. It's a fantastic community. It is a rental community with space to grow. Those houses are not affordable. I'm hearing from people who want to move into the neighborhood who are on the wait list and have been for a while. Who there's no way they can afford those new houses. They're much higher rent than most of the other units in Slemon Park. Why was there no movement from your department, from social development and housing, to build affordable housing units in Slemon Park, which seems an ideal fit?
Yeah, okay. So we are doing other affordable housing in the Summerside area. There's a recognition that there's a need for housing at all levels of the housing continuum, whether it's the more expensive units or whether it's at the social housing need. And there are different, partners around the table, and each of them bring their goals and their priorities and their objectives to the table in terms of what they want to develop.
Trish? Oh, sorry.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Sonya, on the numbers, but I think there's 90-plus affordable units coming on stream in Summerside here before the end of the year.
Trish?
So there's no, the situation in Slemon Park, it's a Crown corporation, so there was never discussion of, public affordable housing units being built in that space. It would only have happened if a private developer had put in an application to the Affordable Housing Development Program. That's the only way that could move forward. That seems like a strange and lost opportunity, I guess, there.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's it. We can move on from me.
Hannah?
Thanks. You'd mentioned earlier about the long lead time for builds, which is the market as it is right now. But there's funding was under the National Housing Strategy was announced earlier this year for called the Rapid Housing Initiative through CMHC, which was specifically to create new affordable housing and address particularly homelessness, but on a broader basis, but using sort of some more creative solutions. A colleague of mine who works in Toronto was part of the project to put in modular housing that went from concept to move in about 6 months, funded partially through CMHC programming. And, you know, it's done again with community partners, which is a key piece. So I guess 2 questions. One is, has the government, PEI government, applied for, had any discussions around accessing some of these other specific programs that are in place, which may help some more creative solutions to create actual housing units? And yeah, we'll start with that one because that's one question.
So we have supported, we have applied for and supported developers to apply for various funding streams through the National Housing Strategy. So we're at the table in terms of helping facilitate the processes with our federal partners. In terms of the Rapid Housing Initiative, that's a fairly new announcement in the last couple of weeks, and I understand we'll be receiving more details from our partners at CMHC in the upcoming weeks. We understand broadly from the announcement what that entails, and you know, we're working internally on what some of the ideas could be that we would bring forward, but we really need those details before we start nailing down what we would be eligible for and able to do.
Anna?
Thank you. And the other thing you had mentioned earlier that we've not really heard a lot about, I mean, I know of only one specific bill related to nonprofits and housing cooperatives. And so I know that, you know, there's been a real kind of landmark build with the King Square expansion that Bill Campbell, you know, has been championing for years and is getting closer, St. Martha's. So, and that's going to be probably one of the most substantive rent geared to income unit spaces in certainly in our area, but housing cooperatives are you know, a really interesting and creative route again to sort of actually engage people who need housing in their own housing solutions. What has your department been doing around helping beyond someone like Bill, who is, you know, tireless, to kind of expand in that space? Because all I'm hearing is private development right now.
Right, thank you for that question. So there are a couple of things that are going on right now. Through the Community Housing Fund, we announced back in February with our CMHA partners a number of projects, I think it's 13 in total, and of those there are 5 projects that are specifically related to nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, and those are new builds right across PEI. So there's about $2.6 million that are going into those in terms of investments. We haven't had a lot of reach out from our cooperatives that currently exist in PEI. However, we have had some discussions with some other interested parties that are outside of the current group of cooperatives. So there's work to do in that area. We've had some initial discussions, but certainly not down the road in terms of a specific project on the cooperative side as yet.
Anna?
Thank you, Chair. My colleague mentioned around sort of house purchasing and the ability to sort of kind of enter into the homeowner market versus the rental market, and obviously that market is also very challenged. We know that recently we saw the year-over-year house pricing increase for PEI was over 30%. I think it was 37-point-something%, which is also very close to what it was the year before. What, if any, is the role of government reflecting that in terms of the long-term housing action plan? Is there a role for government to try and cool the market in any way, or to reflect that in terms of needing to update the plan accordingly, given the gap that's happening now for people actually be able to enter as first-time buyers in particular?
So in terms of home ownership, I mean, I guess one thing I would be cautious in terms of what government's role is in terms of cooling that market. We have done work in other areas in terms of the home ownership side, and you know, the the down payment assistance program is one, but we also have a partnership with Habitat for Humanity in terms of providing funding for them to support low-income families who are looking to be homeowners. So, those are a couple of areas that we've done some work.
Anna?
Thank you, Chair. And then the other one is around, you'd mentioned earlier about short-term rentals and converting back to long-term rentals. Short-term rentals didn't actually appear in the Housing Action Plan, though we have talked about them thankfully since. But we still don't have an overall strategy about sort of, again, data about, like, we introduced legislation last year through tourism to sort of begin to sort of track them in terms of a tourism number as a tourism product, but that data analysis of, on a provincial basis, the impact of short-term rentals onto the market, first of all, like how many are there and where are they and what were they before, but also the conversion back. Anecdotally, we're hearing that conversion back is not long-term leases, it's 8-month leases, which are not a solution. Again, as part of your data and data analysis, is that in scope for the department, considering we're talking about a substantive number of properties? I mean, in Charlottetown, it's about 700 plus, what we know, but there are hundreds in the North Shore, there across the province, there are over 1,000. That is something that we can't ignore in terms of the impact that, again, it's having on the market. So can you speak to what your department is considering in terms of data and potentially reflecting that in the action plan?
So in terms of the short-term rentals, I think we would agree that the conversion back to the long-term model is a blip and will be dependent on what happens with next year's tourism season as well, in the context of what's going on with COVID and where we are with that. In terms of, any type of regulation for short-term rentals, we've certainly done some work had some conversations with the city of Charlottetown around the process that they have been working on and what they may want to do with the units in their area, given that it tends to be the larger volume across the province, other than the other pockets that you've mentioned. We also have had conversations with other municipalities, and the concern that they have expressed is that that one provincial solution doesn't work for every community across the island. So it's communities need to have the flexibility to be able to make decisions in their areas and make those decisions based on what they see in their communities. So that's kind of where we are in terms of looking at that particular issue.
One follow-up to that, Chair, thank you. Has there been, in that discussion with the City of Charlottetown, has there been any discussion about the fact that they're not currently enforcing their own existing bylaws that make short-term rentals that are not part of a primary residence are actually are illegal?
I haven't had those discussions myself, so I'm not aware of.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
What happens in the case of a second wave? Does this program, have you considered any thoughts to what will happen? Will that?
About it, like the current program that's in place, or like what we have as a COVID contingency fund on our budget, which will allow us to do different programs. We might have to refer back to something like the TRAB. Again, we can't predict the future, but we do have the money set aside that we can tap into if we need to.
I just didn't know if the program would be paused again if there's another second wave or.
Well, I don't know. I would never say we're really out of COVID. I mean, I think if you look around what's happening across Canada right now, and even closer to home in Moncton, I don't really look at it as, I think we are still in COVID, and we just have to reevaluate it as we go forward. So, but to answer you more directly, we do have a COVID fund that's available to tap into.
And I appreciate some of the programs that your area did with COVID. You mentioned the essential services focus, the temporary rental assistance. But I have to ask, those are internal in Department of Social Development areas. But what I don't understand is that I think, Sonya, you were in the media talking about how a housing officer went, and which was one of the best programs for the summertime was the food school program. But I just don't understand why somebody so important as the housing officer would have been, was it a problem with the Department of Education? Did they not have the staff there, or how did that whole thing come about?
What we did when COVID took place, and nobody could predict what was going to go on and take place, we created strategy groups, groups put together, and one was the social development group, which contained both ministers from different departments. And one of the things that came up was the food security program. We were needing people to do it. The housing office at the time wasn't needed because we had gone back to the contractors and talked to them, and even they didn't know what their future was going to hold. They didn't know if they're going to be able to build. They didn't know what the rules were allowed. They didn't know what the labor was going to be and even what labor could be used. It was a decision that was made at the time, and I think it was a good decision made at the time. And I don't think any of the contractors that we talked to were upset by that. I mean, there was full disclosure. It wasn't meant that it was, I would say it was probably an 80-20 split, but there were still people talking to them. I myself were talking to them.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to, that was one of the questions I've had, and I think that it was a successful program. You did a great job. I just didn't understand the logistic of between the different departments. So, is anything else on the, everybody okay?
I think, Chair?
Yeah.
I think following on from our previous comments around the critical nature of data and understanding the registry, I'd like to make a motion that we request Sonya and David to come back with that information, either to come back personally to another meeting or to have a date that we return, that have that information brought back. We may need to go through it to have it explained. I understand we wouldn't want to necessarily table it all in writing, so it may be something that may be better to have them come back with that.
Okay, how does the committee feel about that? Okay. You're bringing a motion to the floor
Yep.
right now? Okay. Can we have it read for the clerk, or?
We would ask for a time frame, a reasonable time frame to have the witnesses return to provide an update and a briefing on the data surrounding the rental registry, the housing registry, I mean.
Great. Any discussion on that? No. Okay, do we need to vote? All in favor, say aye.
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 Is that something that you want before the house opens, before or while the house sets, New Year?
As soon as possible.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we'll yeah, Brad?
Definitely. I mean, what we've heard from our presenters today is that some of the data they're still collecting, so, you know, as soon as they get the data, of course, that when you say as soon as possible, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
It's data that's being used to make decisions, so it's pretty critical.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we'll do is we have to come back just to wrap up the meeting. Actually, does anybody have any new business at this time? No new business? Sorry? No. All right. Okay, so could I get a motion? Thank you for coming in and speaking. That was can I get a motion to adjourn? Heath, meeting is adjourned.